have an agenda before you, and the first item on the agenda, we have a special guest, Mr. Troy Williams from Equality, Utah. Now, you want to introduce him, or just let him come up to the table?
Troy is a mover and a shaker in Utah politics. He's been heading up some important things with the governor, and there's been a lot of exciting transition in the last 48 hours. So.
True. Yes.
Yeah, we made almost front page, it was yesterday, the day before.
Yeah, it's getting old now. Front page all the time. It's a lot of pressure.
Bring out the cameras.
Yeah. So just, if you don't know, Equality Utah is the state's LGBT political advocacy organization. We've been around for about 18 years. Notably, in 2015, we really broke through when we worked closely with the LDS Church to pass the Utah Compromise, which was the first time in Utah history when a Republican, the first time in the nation's history when a Republican-controlled legislature actually passed protections for LGBT people. Hasn't happened before that, and it hasn't happened since in the rest of the country. But it's happened here in Utah. In fact, over the past 4 years, we've placed pieces of legislation, LGBT-inclusive legislation, in front of Governor Herbert's desk, and he signed it. That is unprecedented. It just doesn't happen in other red states, but it happens here. And I think it's a tribute to Utahns being kind and compassionate and just a good people and welcoming. I also think a lot of it has to do with the history of Latter-day Saints who were persecuted and driven across the country for being different. And so there's a little bit, I think, of compassion for folks who are a little bit different. And so I experienced that up on Capitol Hill. I love to brag about that when I'm talking outside of the country or outside of the state, because people always have these ideas about Utah and who we are, and I like to sort of defy those stereotypes. But even though we've made a lot of progress, there's obviously lots of challenges that we have, and of course we all are concerned about the issue of youth suicide. And what do we do about that? Suicide being the leading cause of death for young people in the state. And in our community, it's been particularly concerning because we know that LGBTQ kids have disproportionately higher rates of suicide than straight kids. And so we were asking ourselves, what do we do? And why is this happening? We don't know all the reasons why. We know that there's multiple reasons for why the suicide rates are high. There's not one particular one. And so there's got to be multiple solutions. And so one of the issues that was coming up time and again for us as we were talking to people is this issue of conversion therapy. And just to give you a little history, conversion therapy became kind of prominent in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was pretty abusive physically at first. It could include electric shock therapy, or it could include aversion techniques like sitting a gay kid down and having him look at muscle magazines and then drink Epicap syrup until it induced nausea, in the hopes of trying to shift their attractions. And what we know now, we have data now nationally on what this does to people. Now, talk therapy, those kind of more abusive practices, physically abusive practices, you don't really see that happening anymore. People aren't being tortured. There's not lobotomies or castration anymore, thankfully. But the talk therapy version of conversion therapy can be equally as insidious because it gives these kids these false hopes and these false origins for their attractions. So a therapist may take a young man and say, well, if you stop crossing your legs when you sit, if you talk with a deeper voice, if you start playing basketball, we're going to be able to, your same-sex attractions are going to start to diminish. And then they tell the girls, well, if you just start dressing more feminine and stop playing basketball, right, then maybe your same-sex attractions will diminish. And then more insidiously, a conversion therapist will tell a young person that the reason why you're gay or you have these same-sex attractions is because of your parents. You may have had an absent father or a dominating mother, and that kind of places the blame on parents, creating this wedge between a child and their mom or their dad. And fundamentally, these kind of rejecting behaviors is the issue of suicide. Now, the new national data that's come out last year is that when young people are subjected to conversion therapy, their rates of depression double, and their attempts at suicide triple. And it kind of speaks to this fundamental issue when a young person is exiled from those social safety networks that cultivate mental health, whether it's the family unit or it's church or it's schools or neighborhoods. Anytime that a child feels ostracized and alienated and isolated, then those rates of depression begin to skyrocket. And so conversion therapy inherently tells a young person that there's something wrong with you. And when these techniques tend to fail, which they inevitably more often than not do, a child will feel like they failed their therapist, failed their family, failed their church, or maybe failed their God. And that's when the despair, sits in. And so we know that if we can cultivate a culture of belonging where every child knows that they're loved and that they have value, that is the greatest protective factor we have for reducing suicide in the state. So we set out to create legislation to actually work on this, to address this issue specifically for minors. And the first door I knocked on was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so we went there, we had a big meeting, and to our delight, they said, we would like to work with you on this. And they issued a pretty strong statement repudiating the abusive practices of conversion therapy. And then they were concerned about religious liberty issues, and we didn't want to do anything that would, violate or step on anyone's, faith. So my attorneys and their attorneys got together and worked. The same folks that helped us with the non-discrimination law, the same attorneys, started working on the conversion therapy bill. And I love that, because historically we've had some conflicts, with Latter-day Saints and LGBT people. And so I love it whenever we can bring people together and actually find, what are our common values? What do we share? And can people who have been historically at odds work together for the betterment of everybody? So we worked out legislation, and we got two really conservative Republicans to sponsor the legislation, Representative Craig Hall and Senator Dan McKay. And they went to town on this. Usually we don't get our bills passed the first time we tried it, we introduced them. It took us 7 years to get our non-discrimination law passed. And so we hit some hiccups this session. And some very pro-conversion therapy folks kind of got involved, and the legislation stalled this last March. And so after that kind of fell apart, we've continued to work with the governor's office. And last week, I think a week ago today, the Salt Lake County Council passed a resolution, and it was a unanimous resolution, 4 Democrats, 5 Republicans, really proving that this isn't a partisan issue, that we all can kind of come together on these things. And then the resolution was simply calling on the legislature and the governor to act. And then 2 days later, the governor acted. It's something that we weren't expecting. We talked about it, but I wasn't really expecting it. But Governor Herbert kind of came forward, and he asked the Utah Board, Licensing Board of Utah Psychologists, DOPL, yes, yeah. Right, exactly. To actually come together and actually propose regulations on this practice, so that we can actually protect it.
But they assigned it to the
Right.
psychologist, not just
Right, exactly,
the licensed
exactly.
psychologist.
And the idea behind this is that we can sort of move it out of the political realm, where everyone has their agenda. I've obviously got a pro-LGBT agenda, and there's folks that have an anti-LGBT agenda. And by taking it out of that and actually tasking the psychologists to actually regulate their field, we saw that as a really promising move, and something that we believe will create a permanent and lasting prohibition on the
Well,
practice.
something I thought was interesting in the article, because again, why we've been tossing cows about becoming educated,
Yeah.
because it's something we don't understand well.
Right.
I thought it was interesting in the article, I think it was quoting you about the number of medical associations who are now also taking a formal
Yep.
position nationally.
Yep,
Not just
absolutely.
the 16 states that,
Right.
that there's
E-
medical associations.
Every single legitimate mental health and medical organization has denounced the practice. AMA, APA, all of them. The list is so long that
Pediatric association.
all of them
Yeah.
have, yeah. And so what I hope, I think above all, I mean, there's the terms of the law, the legislation, et cetera, but beyond all of that, what I think is really important is that our community has a lot of pain around these issues. You know, that there's a whole history. When I talk to people, you know, who were in their, 60s, 50s and 60s, who have been through shock therapy, I just have several friends who have done it. When I start to talk about this issue with them, they very quickly tear up, and the pain and the trauma is there, you know. And I talked to we have a 19-year-old boy that we've been working with, who, you know, just a few years ago, you know, he was told to take a rubber band every time that he had a same-sex, thought or desire, to flick the rubber band on his wrist to snap it, you know, and he has kind of, trauma around it as well. And so what I really believe and hope is that by the governor coming out and DOPL coming together, that all of us working together by ending this practice will send a message of healing to generations of LGBT people in the state. Knowing that the state of Utah, of all places, has stood up against this practice is going to send a powerful message of healing to people. And knowing that the church and that we're all just trying to embrace these American values that we're celebrating this weekend, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I know that really what LGBT people want is the same thing, to live in this country that we love and to fall in love and build a family and live a full life.
So the next step then in your quest is just waiting for DOPL to respond?
Exactly.
The legislature will then take action additionally? Or?
Well, we're trying to assess that right now. We believe that with DOPL's actions, it will have the efficacy of law, and then it's really an issue of well, do we want it to do a legislation as a sort of symbolic act, to sort of come together as a community and say this is something that we won't tolerate anymore. Those are things that we're going to have to sort of hammer out right now, but all of those are I think Senator McCain and Representative Hall still want to run the bill, so, yeah.
What, just because I wasn't clear, I followed a little bit later. What were the couple of tweaks that got made to the bill that were?
The tweaks were.
I know you felt like they kind of.
Oh, yeah.
I just didn't, I don't think I ever read exactly specifically.
Yeah.
A phrase here
so
or there.
Eagle Forum kind of came forward, and my history. Probably you don't, but when I came off my Mormon mission, I was really scared. I didn't go to conversion therapy, but I was really scared about I'm gay, and I got to figure out how not to be gay. And so what I did was I started volunteering for the Eagle Forum. So Gail Rosica was like my mentor, and the first time I ever went to the Utah State Capitol was with Gail, and she taught me how to lobby and how to become be sort of an activist of sorts, and everything I learned about Capitol Hill I learned from Gail Rosica, and so 30 years later now we find ourselves on the opposite side, but Gail has been so actively working against our community for decades, and so she came forward with a bunch of revisions to the legislation. And it was very clever because she was trying to say, look, I want to protect LGBT kids from conversion therapy, so we want to ban the torture and the physical torture. But we just want to make sure that as long as a therapist doesn't offer or promise a permanent and lasting change, which is what they changed the language to, then they could do whatever they wanted to do. So it was this kind of loophole. So a conversion therapist could continue all the insidious kind of practices and techniques as long as they said, I can't promise you that you're going to permanently be changed. And so it would have allowed conversion therapists to continue their practice here. So we pulled the legislation, circled it on the Hill, and it didn't move forward after that. So, and to be fair to the governor and to lawmakers up there, it was all happening so fast that we didn't have didn't get a time to educate people. We brought the church on board, and we brought certain key folks on board, but we didn't have the whole body yet. So we thought, okay, we'll hold back, and then we'll spend the year educating lawmakers in dialogue until we get there. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. We appreciate the the insight. I mean, Tally has kept us informed a little bit, and she's raised the subject, but then just reading the media, just from the last legislature to the county's action, to the
Yeah.
governor's action.
Well, yeah,
And I've always personally felt it was, because it's more of a social service issue, which
Right.
comes from the state to the
Right,
county.
exactly.
So we were not sure where we fit in,
Right,
other
right,
than
right.
first
Derek,
aid,
you ran a
getting
very good
educated.
op-ed or whatever
Yeah.
you did yesterday that
Yeah.
really, I thought detailed that very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The things were happening at the
Yeah.
county and the state level.
Yeah.
Well, then too, when you've got American Medical Association, et
Right.
cetera,
Right.
all on board, that gives us some credibility too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, for inviting me in, and thank you for creating a welcoming city for LGBT folks. I'm sure you have lots of them.
Yep.
So, I have friends who live here, so I know
Right.
they do, so,
Yeah.
yeah, it means a lot to us. So,
Thank you.
Troy,
Thank you so
very
much.
I
Right.
understand we'll have some youth in here later today too, that'll be talking to us in our public comment.
Okay, great, awesome, okay, awesome, alright, thanks so much, alright, take care.
All right,
Alright, bye.
thank you, Troy. See you. Okay, looking at your agenda, moving ahead, we have today's city council reports, and we'll just be brief and hear anything of substance you'd like to share from your committees. And first, we have Parks, Trails, and Open Space, and so Christine and Melissa, do you wanna?
Sure.
Again,
Christine,
thank you for sharing that with us.
oh, sure, it's been really fun. I've enjoyed it. Christine, do you wanna say anything before I jump in, or do you wanna?
No, I would just say that Melissa's done a fantastic job on
Okay.
the Parks, Trails, Open Space Committee. I think she's probably done more than she expected and acts almost like part-time staff. So, we appreciate your passion and your time.
Yeah,
Well,
and
thank
and
you.
that's why you're a perfect fit for that, because of that passion. And of course, I think throughout the city, we have so many people that watch us so closely, so we have a lot of interest.
Good, well, I'm glad to do it. So thank you for having me. Some of the things that the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Committee has been up to over the past few months is we've spent a lot of time talking about finding a place for a dog park in Cottonwood Heights. And been working with Andrew, and I don't see him here, but kind of in conjunction with, I think, the school project that he's been working on, and kind of on city time and kind of for school. And in our last meeting, we did kind of vote and narrow our recommendations to like top 5 locations, which I passed to Mike Johnson, which I think he's gonna share with the council. But I will say that I think among the top 3 were spaces that would be land acquisition or lease. So, and I'll leave it at that. Let's see, we recently heard a presentation from a couple, did you wanna say something?
Well, I think it would be helpful for the council to know the top 3, if you're willing to share that.
Well, I just don't know if, cause they're private property, and I don't know if they read it in the paper, if they'd be.
I guess if we got you to decide if it was better to do that, potentially a closed session item.
I mean, and I
Some
think
people
that,
can get kind of squirrely.
Well,
when
but
they don't get
eventually it'll
properties
come
on the
to us
list.
appropriately.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have like sort of an estimate of value of those properties, just to like, so we could, as we think about budgets in the future, it's always good to, like, are you thinking?
we
value?
don't even know if they'd be for sale. And so, but we just kind of, based on a lot of Andrew's research, these are just, these are open spaces within the city that are just are not being used at the moment, and so we thought would be good candidates
So
for.
we're on Mike Shelton's backyard.
I'm not sure where Mike Sheldon's backyard is, but,
Saved.
yeah. So, but, yeah, and I mean, if this was easy, I think a dog park would already be in Cutler Heights.
Too tough.
And so I think it'll be.
We got this close.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
At the swamp lot? Was it the
We
swamp lot?
designed it.
Yeah. So,
The design budgeted. We just trying to come up with a stand.
yeah, and I think there will be ongoing discussions. I mean, I don't think we're done, but, we're trying to get closer.
One comment I made to the committee a couple of sessions maybe ago is that we do have a lot of public places in our city. I know people cringe when I say this, but schools, where we have ample land. And if you look at the side, say just right here, right up the street, on the south side or the north side or east side or west side of the school, you could easily fence it's something that I mentioned, but you all communicate with the school district more than we do, but it might be worth a conversation.
Well, I know school district property was one of the areas you guys talked about initially, because someone talked about they had a school that they had been using, and the principal said, okay. Remember that
But
discussion?
not
But not formally.
officially.
Right, yeah, and I think, I mean, cause Roger Kerr has headed up that subcommittee, and I think he has done some inquiries, but hasn't gotten much response.
I guess my comment, and I don't mean to usurp what the committee's doing, but I think at the end of the day, we all wanna see a dog, many people wanna see a dog park, maybe not everybody. And if the school district is going out for a tax increase, maybe they'd be willing to just help out a little bit here. I don't know, I just always like to look for opportunities when somebody's looking for something. It just, that's not Melissa's job to interact with the school
No.
district, but I
It
know
is
we,
ours.
but it's
Well, once we
ours.
get the recommendation from your broader group, that gives us, you know, a level of comfort in marching orders to pursue something. I'd like to see that studied and what your priorities are and talk about that. And because I know years ago, we also looked at a public site as a temporary dog park, you know, that was undeveloped. Along Big Cottonwood Canyon Road was still available too, but.
Mhm.
So anyway, I don't know what your priorities are, what you came up with.
Well, I mean, to me, that just voting within our committee, that, I mean, 3 of the top 5 sites were acquisitions and or leases.
Yeah.
That tells me that, I mean, that to me would check 2 boxes, like acquiring more open space and then the dog park.
Yeah.
So, but I'll let you draw your conclusions from your sense.
And the timing of the recommendation would come, when do you think?
Well, I mean, we're kind of on hold with it right now, I think. I mean, we passed, like I said, we passed the information to Mike, and, I mean, I think it would, you know, probably be, I know that one of the property owners, Mike, and I think someone else from your group had tried to set up a meeting with, and they didn't show. And so I don't know, you know, honestly, I don't know where the process goes from
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
Well, I guess I mentioned that because it might be helpful to have the closed session that you recommend, and at least talk about it,
Mhm.
understand values and things, because,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so Mike, maybe you could let us know.
Yeah, and I think that's the logical next step. Ultimately, staff is drafting a Parks, Trails, and Open Space master plan, and there will be a component of the open space chapter in that will be relevant to dog parks. But I feel this recommendation feeds into that and becomes a springboard for further public input on this. So I think it makes sense to have a conversation prior to the master plan with the council, and then a formal recommendation will come about through the actual master plan.
So what's the timing on the master plan?
The master plan is being drafted, that's a few months out, just given, we're trying to work on this internally, and we can do so much, but,
Mike, would you sit on the table so we can hear you? Thank you.
so to bridge that gap, we'd like to just have that discussion with the council in an upcoming work session.
But we're ready when, you know, we can do it the next meeting as far as a closed session, be just informed. I appreciate, I've been to several meetings, but I don't know the outcome of that.
Okay, and I'd be happy to attend that with Roger Kerr. He's been kind of heading that subcommittee within our committee, so.
Sorry, I just think that if we need to start having some dates, and otherwise it's 3 months, and then 6 months, and then a year, and I don't know, my term will be done, and we won't have a dog park again, and I just would like to, I'd like to, you know, get something done.
I'm saying
No, and
we can
there's-
do a closed session next
So let's
meeting.
do it.
I'd like to know, because I know that they've worked a year almost.
It's been, yeah.
It's interesting that this information is already publicly available. Their meetings are held in public, and so it's not something we could now withhold from the public anyway.
Yeah.
But if we're talking specifically about acquisition and stuff like that, I think that might be,
Just,
yeah, I hear you,
all of these sites have been discussed and voted on in public.
And I would be happy to talk about it in public. I didn't bring that data with me because I was a little reticent about, like, saying, hey, this is the site we're looking at for dog park.
I think that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I know what a lot of the sites are, but I just don't know what the priority was, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, just sort of pretty obvious we have so many sites in our city, so
Mhm.
it's where the priorities are. So maybe our next meeting that we could do that, if you felt comfortable.
I have it down.
Yeah. Okay.
When is your next meeting? The next
2 weeks.
2 weeks?
If that, look at that, if you, present date
Yeah,
and time.
sounds great.
Okay. All right, in other news, Barbara Gardner and Marty Scheid, who are both citizens of the city, Marty is the urban forester for Riverton, came and presented to our meeting to make the case for not only a tree ordinance, but an urban forester. And, I mean, earlier in the same meeting, Mike Johnson had talked about tree preservation ordinance being part of an open space master plan. And they would like to see it go further to be like a tree planting and maintenance ordinance along with preservation. And the committee supports both of those measures, not only the tree ordinance, but hiring an urban forester.
I believe the rec center does have some sort of a tree specialist on staff.
They had an arborist.
Is he still there?
He's not there anymore. That was
Did they get a
Corey.
new one?
I don't think the new one has. But I think the concept, the county has one that we have access to, but we could, also what you're talking about in that ordinance is something when trees are removed during construction, or what are the requirements for replacement, stuff like that. I know that in the last few years, we've come into that several times. That's something I definitely should say.
Let's see, oh, and then I guess to the open space master plan, the committee is participating in Matt Taylor's creation of an open space master plan, and actually, at our last meeting, Ronna Cohen had volunteered to work with Matt outside of our regular committee meetings to, like, keep, with the creation of that, to keep that moving forward outside of our monthly meetings. Some recent efforts that the committee has made to support the construction of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail above Cottonwood Heights include Greg Hilbig, who's on our committee. He is the trails manager for Draper City, and he's on our committee. He walked the line of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail that's under construction now from Big Cottonwood Canyon to Ferguson with the U.S. Forest Service Representative Zinnia Wilson to lend his expertise in trail building. And I've seen photos, they're making a lot of progress this summer. It was projected to have that section done in 3 years, but I'm hoping, I mean, from what I've seen in the photos, that it might be earlier.
Who's doing that construction?
So the Forest
Is that the
Service
county?
is
The
actually,
Forest Service?
yeah, it came by way of a grant through Salt Lake County. Let's see. Members of the committee participated in a Cottonwood Canyons Foundation-sponsored invasive weed pull along that section earlier this summer. And then we're also looking forward to participating in some conversations that Christine has been spearheading with state representatives regarding possibly acquiring funds through the Land and Water Conservation Fund and maybe the Trust for Public Lands. And then we're also looking forward to participating in the selection of a consultant to find some in-neighborhood access east of Cottonwood Heights, the RFP that Mike issued earlier this year. And I know that you got about 4 applications for that. And
Yeah.
so, let's see. Also, recently Tim Halbeck, who is a citizen who I think is also running for city council, he
Yeah.
came recently to one of our meetings to talk about, he's installed some test replacement signs at some platforms at the Ferguson Canyon Trailhead, and he, at his own expense. And I'm not sure what the timeline is, but he'd like to see how those weather over time.
Yeah, because the previous ones got destroyed, so he's testing it out. Yeah.
And so, I've been up there to see them, they look nice. So hopefully they'll last, and I don't know if maybe during the test period, if at some point the city could come up with some money to pay for those versus having a private citizen pay for those. Other items that
I
we.
think he just did it and he didn't even know he was doing it.
Yeah.
The signs, right, Tim?
Well,
I mean, we weren't even,
yeah,
He asked if he could do
he
it.
asked if he could, but he didn't say, would you pay for it?
No,
so,
yeah, he just said he'd like to try it. And then after it's proven the system uses, then we can look at doing that, yeah.
Mhm.
It was developed with the county years ago, but we have a responsibility to maintain it. And we actually paid the service area to maintain it.
Well, and, I mean, I would think that the city, may have some experience in knowing what materials would work.
Well, if you look at the materials that we used on the Cottonwood Canyon Trail,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, he was able to track down the graphics that were used for the original signs, and so, something to consider. Some of the other items that we've kind of levied advisement, and feedback to, includes, passing along feedback about the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan, to this group. Ben Hill's new master plan for Anzac Park, and then we also heard a deck hockey proposal recently. And then earlier today, I met with Tim Beery and to talk about contributing parks, trails, and open space articles to the newsletter every month. So, yeah.
Okay,
That's all
I'm gonna add something to your list. You also had a very successful project in planting some trees.
That's right, there was, it wasn't directly a Parks, Trails, and Open Space Committee project, but yeah, it kind of funneled through
Well, I
our
just
group.
remember what, they brought that in.
Yeah, Greg Reed,
Greg
a
Reed
member of the
brought it in,
committee,
and
brought
they
that
planted
to
it
the
at Mountain
group.
View Park,
Right.
which are their large caliper trees, and the insensitive to what trees were lost there years ago because they were too small to survive, it was very helpful.
I think from a budget perspective, so the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Committee has no budget. If there was ever a need for that, Tim, what would be the process and timing for a request if they had one for a budget?
Well, right now, it would have to be a budget amendment.
No, I mean, but like if they wanted to request it for the next fiscal year.
It would be probably in conjunction with we will look at another retreat as a council to prioritize items, and then once those priorities are established, then we would look at in the first part of the year, next year, looking at putting together numbers and budget proposals for that. So
But
that
a
would be-
request that could come through that retreat will allow things to be prioritized.
Okay,
Yeah.
and what's the timing of the retreat?
Retreat will probably be more towards the end of this year, November, December.
Okay,
And then we'll begin working on the budget soon after that, which takes the next 6-7 months.
all right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, time's moving, so, is there anything else? Okay. Historic Committee, mosquito abatement,
So sadly,
Business Association.
Max Evans is resigning from the Historic Committee. Sorry to see him go. The focus currently is on the Butlerville tent, which this year will spotlight Brighton High School's 50th anniversary. And Calvin's little sister, Krista, is in charge of that. She's working hard. We'll be searching for new committee members, so taking applications for the next few months. And that's about it for historic. Sound Valley mosquito abatement, I've been really impressed with their organization. They run a tight ship,
Yeah.
really good with their budgeting. We had one confirmed case of Zika in Utah so far this year. That was from a traveler coming back from affected area. The mosquitoes that carry dengue, Zika, and chikungunya will increase here in Utah.
Chicken what?
Gunya.
Did you just have that?
With it, barbecued up. They will see a rise as temperatures continue to increase in Utah. Those will all increase. And hard to say how fast that's gonna happen. A lot of the research in this arena comes out of Utah, US Department of Agriculture, and they're being dismantled. I don't know if everybody knew that. So that's alarming. Emergency planning. The flooding threat was declared over last week by the Salt Lake County Flood Control. We had no reported flooding at all in Cottonwood Heights this year, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that was a nice kind of change.
Yeah, a huge
Because as much
plus.
water, and as much as is still up at the top of those mountains, it's July.
Yeah, which leads me to the next thing. We're still alerting everyone to be careful of water levels. I think that's called dangerous. and fire safety, focus on fireworks as they're coming up. Also, they will be picking up sandbags, people that wanna get rid of their sandbags, if they get them out on the pallet, they'll pick them up on the date.
They use that, our public works.
They use some public works on that. The next Emergency Management Neighborhood Watch quarterly training is scheduled for August 8th at 7 p.m. here at City Hall. The topic will be holiday and winter fire and safety. Cottonwood Heights Business Association, Pat Saltzman is taking a temporary leave. Her son has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He's a father of 4, so our heart really goes out to Pat and her family. The board's been working on developing a new strategic plan. There will be no networking event in the month of July. We're taking it off, but the Superhero Bike Ride has been rescheduled for August 9th at 6 p.m. here in the parking lot. Can you make it?
I just know there's something, no, I will not be there, but I know they like the youth council to help,
They love
so.
the youth council to help, so.
That's okay, this summer's kind of, I recognize a Friday date like that.
We recognize Mondays. Every Monday in August, we've got Bikes and Heights, our food truck event over at Mountain View Park, from 5
Last
to 8.
year, that was so fun.
That was really popular, so I think we'll just keep gathering momentum. And that's it on my agenda.
Well, in my compliments to Kyle, everyone should know that, as a mayor, I get the privilege of going to many ribbon cuttings. We do 1 or 2 a week, it seems
Yeah.
like, and acknowledge every one of them that represent the city and welcoming small businesses, so thank you for doing that.
It's fun to see
It is.
the influx of new energy.
Will be interesting, All right, thank you, Mike. Art Council and Valley Emergency?
Yeah. The Arts Council is deep into their preparations for the musical, and the dates are on this agenda, July 12th, 13th, 15th, 18th, 19th, and 20th. So they're working hard. They put in a ton of time during this season, and they've always put on really great productions, and so we're looking forward to that.
They asking infos from us again or not?
What they have decided is
That's
that
better to
city
be-
council are not quite as good in terms of acting as those people who prepare for them months in advance, and so they're going to pre-record those announcements rather than let us fumble through them. Speaking for myself.
It only takes so many
Speaking
years
for
till you figure it
myself.
out.
One of my favorite moments happened right at that time. I was getting ready to go out, and there was a young actress, and I said, so are you nervous? And she said, no, I've practiced this many times. I'm not nervous at all. She said, are you nervous? And I said, as a matter of fact, I am. And she said, don't worry, no one cares what you have to say.
That's really true.
Well, sometimes the truth hurts, but that's the truth, so. Anyway, they're working hard. They are also working hard to try to find better ways to attract sponsors for those events. They were fortunate to do well with their ZAP application again, and that has been a big shot in the arm for the Arts Council to have that money, so. Thanks to ZAP, I guess I would say. Moving on to VEC, Valley Emergency Communication Center. We have successfully terminated for convenience our hearing with Hexagon, and we're happy about that, and Hexagon is happy about that, and so we're grateful to be.
Happy enough to refund some.
We're very grateful to have that done, and that's what we're
Okay,
sticking with.
all right.
So, and we are
Okay, I want-
happy about how that has turned out. That's what I'll say. Also at Valley Emergency, we are beginning the process of the replacement of our executive director.
So John's finally,
John is retiring. And so that search begins shortly, and we'll work hard to replace him. I think it'll be a good process, the one we've been through, those of us who've been on that committee for a while. So look forward to that. And John has worked hard and done a good job
They did
placing
a-
there, so.
Great job out there. Things-
Other than that, they successfully keep answering the phone when you dial 911, and that's really important.
It is.
And sometimes we even accidentally misdial their regular number.
Yeah. I think maybe another thing of interest is this concept of replacing the protocol that we use to answer the phone, and I suspect both chiefs would tell us that that protocol has not served us as well as we had hoped when we moved to it. The process we ask and answer questions when we have a 911 call has been a little bit cumbersome especially in some regard. So you could say, you know, I just walked out and my car has been broken into, and there's nobody around. Did you see what he looks like? No. Did you see which way he was going? No.
Yeah.
Was he carrying a gun? So those things make a lot of sense given the right question path, but we just found that the process of answering and asking those questions has been cumbersome, so we're trying to find better solutions. It turns out to be more complicated than you might think. So complicated that I won't bore you with why, but that's another important thing that's going on as well. Anything else the two of you can think of it, Beck?
I'll just echo your perception of both pro-QA.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having somewhat emergency, but not, not occurring at the moment types, having called 911 in the last couple of years, it's like, how about if you get the address and tell somebody what's going on? I'll be happy to answer all of your questions, but it'd be nice if you let somebody know first.
Yeah, let's get.
We're getting close.
And that's really everybody's priority, is to be sure they have the right information so they can dispatch the right equipment and or people, but to get going and to get moving in the right direction. And so everybody's working on that same front. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. Scott, U City Council, Wasatch Front Waste and Recycling, Buttable Day, CH2. Just 4 little items.
Well, the youth council is, actually our last meeting, we went down the Cottonwood Canyon Trail. Amazing the amount of trash that they picked up. I mean, I expected there would be some, but I wasn't expecting the amount they did. They pulled up some weeds and along the lines there, which was nice.
Did you guys walk the whole trail?
Well, we started,
Of Wasatch Boulevard?
no, down from the park and ride.
Okay.
And I had 4 ask, which park are we meeting at? And so I says, no, you have to read the whole thing, it's park and ride. That's a different thing. But no, they just walked all down there and then they were picked up at Spencer's Farm.
Perfect, excellent.
So, they did that. We our service officer this year is the first time we've had one serve twice. So Grace is on top of things. She'll be handling things with getting ushers and stuff for the play, getting youth council assigned for Butlerville days, all that kind of stuff. That's still going forward. We have our meetings planned out through December, like we usually do. Let's see, Wasatch Front Waste and Recycling. The biggest general issue there is still what's occurring with recycling. That there's a lot of, they've got another survey that they've got out. Recycling costs of, 3 years ago, we got paid to take recycling to the recyclers. And it used to be we got paid quite a bit. It was always a net revenue, and now it costs 50 to 75% more to recycle it than it does to take to landfill. But that's just the immediate, current costs, filling up your landfill and having to take it to Twila costs a whole lot more. But the consensus is that we're still supportive of keeping that. There's a lot invested in that stream and being able to do that, and that the recycling market will improve. The current situation is China has really restricted what they take in, but other markets will probably open, and there's a couple of things that are happening domestically that, could maybe put a significant change in being able to keep things a little bit closer, especially with paper and stuff, so it may be that pain for a couple of years.
Heard something really alarming, maybe you can confirm. I heard that they have little cameras now on the recycling trucks, and that the driver watches as each can unload. And if the driver spots something that is not recyclable, then
Then the
that
recycling
entire truckload goes to the dump and not.
It is possible if you had a contaminated can, that could ruin a load. Yes, I'll have to ask about cameras. I'll send a text out. If they do that, I have not heard that that's the case, but I can get an answer.
Yeah, I'd like to know, 'cause I'm really.
Remind me in here, I'll check that. And I don't know, I'll ask what they do. That seems a little strange, honestly, but.
I know when we talked about recycling bins at Butlerville, they said one item in that bin and it would be rejected, the whole bin. So,
I think that probably depends on what it is. The biggest concerns there would be food or water, or wet. I mean, if you dampen it all down, then but that'll go as far as it will kind of soak out. But, no, that's easy one. I'll see if I can get an answer before tonight. I haven't heard that we have any cameras on the trucks.
we're getting watched and how do they decide if it goes to recycling or to.
They'll be on a route that will do one or the other. They'll be either doing a trash route or a recycling
Different
route.
trucks.
But a recycling truck
Yeah.
could go to the dump under what circumstance?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the
Yeah.
question.
Actually,
Okay,
that's interesting.
Let's see, they are still looking at their next potential rate increase is still about 2 years out. That's one that has to come back to the individual member cities. But again, they have another survey. Haven't seen something from, that's because we're not doing the survey yet. It'll be coming out in a few weeks. We'll probably get an email that you can go out and take a survey. They usually last time they did that, they got 6,000 responses from the district, which was actually pretty amazing when you consider it, but, Butlerville Days Committee, maybe we can ask Ann to come next meeting to just make sure we know where we're supposed to be.
Already planned, yeah.
She knows well enough, you should be here, and here. The biggest changes with Butlerville Days that affects us is the parade route change.
Thank goodness I thought they'd change the rate, and we were gonna have to pay.
It'll be going straight down Bengal from about the Smiths area.
And I think that's gonna be one of the most confusing things, because a lot of citizens still don't know that.
Well, you know what we need to probably do is talk to Ann and make sure that, that letter that she sends out to all the neighbors, we may wanna double it up and send it out to some of the old neighbors as well, saying the parade is not going down by your front yard this year, just so you know.
And maybe a couple volunteers to walk the street and let people know if they start camping out on the wrong
Yeah.
street.
Which they will, I
They
bet
will.
you.
Yeah, I mean,
A couple that, because you drive down there early that morning, you're probably gonna have chairs and blankets.
Well, and they probably should know that there won't be barricades and stuff up. I mean, people, I expect it will.
On Murray has them
We'll
too.
get along with a lot of phone calls, but at the very least.
On
we
Muir
should
Street,
probably
on Vine Street, there's
Send
already
a flyer to those homes on.
Oh, on
Fine.
State
It's
Street,
not fine.
on State Street.
I know, we don't have time, but
Forty.
real quick with that, I know the rec center has time on the digital board in front of the middle school.
Oh, okay, oh.
They could put it on that digital board that everybody can read it every day.
I mean, that would be, yeah, another good place local to put it, just,
And also, if the city's particularly really nice, also have a signboard at the skate park, the old elementary school.
yeah.
But anything we do to get that word out,
Yeah, the hand deliver along that route, I think, because they're expecting it, we usually do all around the park, you know, Butler Village is coming.
Yeah, I
this
appreciate
is
that
what
for
you can
people who
expect.
live there, no, but it's all the people who wanna go to the parade, wait a minute, logistically, I need to really
Or
think
possibly
differently
see if-
where I'm parking, getting there, plus it starts at 11 a.m., not 3, so.
You could do a dozen signs, this is not a parade route, and stick it in the park
Okay.
shed, that's what those are
Go
called.
ahead, I'm sorry to slow you up here.
They'll do the movies in park and the other things Friday night. The carnival is doing the buy one, get one wristbands, I believe that's 12 to 3 on, it came in your newsletter this week.
Yeah, the newsletter was excellent, that four-fold,
The parade route changes in the newsletter.
everything's in there, and every resident
And,
got that.
and we'll come next week also
But-
here to
but-
talk.
Yeah,
or
but
next week, 2
you need
weeks
to,
ago.
you need to get in there and
But
read
it had, all the information's there, and every resident got it, so.
And I think the blow-up rides there are doing a 2-day pass, if that's something that you're interested in. CH2 usually works out really well. It's a good chance for Matt and people at the rec center to cross over on things with Mount View or the trailheads that you've been in. We recently, Tim just sent out a letter from the city to the track about the Anzac Park improvements, that indicating our support and encouraging the funding of that. And it's good, again, that cross communication with the rec center, the school district, and all the other entities that we deal with, I think is one of the things that makes things work here well. So, I will send off a question about recycling trucks.
Okay, yeah. All right, I'll try and be quick and brief. You can time me, 5 minutes. I'm on 8 or 10 different boards, so I'll just give you some highlights of some things I've been doing the last month or two. Probably of the most interest, I think, is the Central Wasatch Commission, which is much like a city council, because you've got Mayor Jenny Wilson, Mayor Jackie Skupski, and you've got Mayor Park City, and so it's a fairly influential group who has a passion, interest regarding the Central Wasatch. We have 3 of those members, that 2 for sure will not be back, and possibly a third, with the mayor of Salt Lake City and the chairperson, which is Chris McCannis from Sandy City, who will not be back, and the mayor of Mill Creek, who's up for re-election. So there was proposed yesterday that, not proposed, it was the responsibility by the creating documents that we elect new chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, but we twisted Shane's arm and we agreed to re-elect the current members for another 2-year term, and then at the end of this year, when a couple of those individuals are no longer in office, we'll replace them. So we're gonna wait until we have full membership at the end of the year to do that. One of the most challenging things that this Central Wasatch Commission is doing is it created a stakeholders council of 35 very diverse interests. But they, I think, were very strategic in creating leadership of that. Dr. Kelly Bricker, who's a friend of mine from the University of Utah, who's in Parks and Recreation, is the vice chair, and what's his name's the chair, who's the Chamber of Commerce director for Sandy City, and they don't have a dog in the fight, so they've been pretty objective. So that group has been meeting, and one of their biggest issues most recently is talking about the capacity of the canyons, and they feel that some of the members feel that capacity should determine the plans for future development and use. And so they will be looking at creating a subcommittee to see how that will be applied. Also, something that's really interesting, the deputy director recently resigned on the 1st of June. I chaired the committee that did the selection of the replacement of that position, and the person was hired is Blake Perez, who's a planner for Salt Lake City. His background with an MPA and is interest is in transportation. We had 76 applicants and shortlisted 8, interviewed 6, interviewed 4 a second time, and then selected Blake Presley, introduced him last night. The other big thing is the environmental dashboard, which they were contacted a few of you to complete that, and that's moving forward. The congressional legislation is still a high priority, and the Central Wasatch Commission has now moved their formal offices from next to Alpha Coffee down to the Gateway.
Oh.
But it's there next to Wasatch Front Regional Council, and Wasatch Front Regional Council allows them to share their meeting rooms and stuff like that, so it's worked well.
Was that your meetings over down there?
No, that's just their offices. So the council meetings and the stakeholder meetings, thanks to Tim and our city, are held right here, which I think is a real plus for us. It really is, because it shows them up and it gives us some credibility, and the views are spectacular.
Keeps you in mind what you're looking at.
But anyway, a lot is going on there, and most recently, I should tell you this, and I talked to Christine about this, is that, you know, we talked about here in our group as well as in that group of not just planning for things years down the road, but what can we do on an interim basis. And so yesterday, and I met with Ralph Becker and Chris McCandless about one of the interim things we can do for the canyons, even though the canyons are not in our jurisdiction, is a requirement that vehicles going out during certain months or certain weather conditions should either be all-wheel drive or change, or there should be some restrictions so that the person doesn't jump out of an airplane into a rental car, into a two-wheel rear drive vehicle and try and head up the canyons, and they get stuck or block the road, and it's congestion. So we talked about it yesterday, also with metering, and communicated with Ralph Becker again today a second time about, from my perspective here, because it impacts Wasatch Boulevard, we like to personally pursue that. And so Chris McCandless on board, so that's something I'm working on the side a bit, and we'll push that. Anyway, a lot of things going on there. Another very important responsibility I have as a mayor is working with UFA, and it's one of the more impressive organizations I've ever worked with as far as their format, organization, their communication, their transparency. So it keeps us as the board members well informed with reports. I'm on the Finance Committee, on the Benefits and Compensation Committee, and we've kind of been through that. We worked through the budget, their staffing, their upward mobility program that they're working on with their member employees. The other big thing is the new interlocal agreement. I think Shane's got that now as a draft, and he'll respond. And the most
I'm reviewing that as
you
well.
were looking to it, yeah. And Tim comes to that meeting with me as well. The most interesting piece about that is the weighted voting, because of the new townships have now been added to UFA, but yet they come in and some people consider they have equal weight, which they don't. Well, they do except for voting with financial matters and budget matters if there's a debate or a question, and then it comes down to weighted voting. You'll all see that in the near future. So UFA is moving well, is in good hands, and of course, one of the valuable employees is retiring pretty soon. We wish him well at the end of the year. But I'm also on COG, which is Council of Governments. Jenny Wilson was the chair. She's just moved on now that she's mayor. A new chair, Jeff Silvestrini from Mill Creek. We talked about a variety of things, more information sharing. One of the big things is talking about issues with Wasatch Front Regional Council, which is funding, and so I try and stay involved with that, the 2020 census. I've pushed Mayor Wilson on how is she going to look at the last quarter of transportation money, where we got our 1.5 from last year, how she's going to allocate their smaller share this year. She's not decided yet, but I keep kind of pushing to, hopefully they'll open that up to some application. Conference of Mayors is more just talking about best practices, talking about Chamber of Commerce, ADUs, but it's just information sharing.
And
I'm
the
also
township mayors coming, council mayors as well.
What's that? Conference of Mayors?
Conference of mayors.
Do the townships come, they,
No, they do not. No, you're right.
Okay, so they're with COG, they don't
Yeah, with COG, but not with that, and they're on UFA and on UPD and those other ones, yeah.
And
we're not
the
with-
next conference in Mayersville, they discussed HB4, but I heard that they might.
We might have, see, we haven't decided a new agenda yet, but, which is that one?
That's sustainability for cities to choose in by the end of the year.
Oh,
If they
okay.
have Rocky Mountain Power to accommodate them.
I'll bring it up,
That'd be
I'll
awesome.
push them, yeah,
HB4 11.
before then, yeah. I'm on two doubles of ZAP, I'm on the ZAP dealing with arts, so we work on funding. I tried to put myself on any committee that has funds allocating to anything that we can be a part of, so I'm on ZAP that allocates to Arts Council. Also, I'm on Tier 2 ZAP, which, boy, I don't know everything on this one. Over the last 3 weeks, I've had to review over 200+ applications for the arts groups. These are dance, music, botanical gardens, yeah, and we hosted them here in our building a week or so ago, and we reviewed 40 of them, yeah. But also track, which is the other big one's coming up this September. You know, the rec center is making an application on Azak Park. I understand we'll be making an application possibly and making improvements to our Big Cottonwood Canyon Trail and maybe some other things. I'm on COG Public Works, which is corridor preservation money. If we ever have expansions or roads and things like that, that's coming up this fall. And probably something I forgot. The only other thing I would like to mention, this is a side note, that just to put it out there, I'm surprised, I mean, surprised Tim, but with the newsletter, that Kim Horiuchi, who's been a contract person who's helped us, Tim is meeting with her, and Tim is meeting with her, and we talked about through our priorities the need to redesign and reformat that. Hopefully you've all heard that that's coming, because I've heard a lot of comments and concerns over the last everybody, but everyone's aware, and that's got some changes are coming.
So we will be meeting, having an item here in August to show you what we're proposing and then implement in September, just to let you know. We're working with Kim
Yeah.
and Tim on that.
And I would just add something quickly on that. It seems like a lot, I don't know if you, I think we all are getting the same emails on the Wasatch Boulevard master plan, but maybe one of the things that we can contemplate in the newsletter, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, is, you know, what's coming in a square, what's coming up for vote before the council, and Wasatch Boulevard master plan this date, or something, so that they know what's coming, because we have it, you've done a great job in our packets of saying, okay, this is what's coming up, and that might be helpful.
I think actually that's what we want to talk, and that's why I bring it up, because that's an important thing to me as I've looked at this recently, and so I wanted to, Kim and I talked about it, and yeah, I agree, yeah, we can change that little thing. Okay, it took twice as long as I said that.
You're the mayor, you have
No, yeah.
lots of time.
All right, let's review the business meeting agenda, if you have that in front of you. We have a new police officer, so Robbie, you'll be introducing Ford. I think he's a Cottonwood Heights resident, isn't he?
He is. He lives on Chris Lane.
Yeah.
He and his fiance.
Did he just graduate from, he's with the airport, I guess.
Yeah, Salt Lake City Police.
Yeah, so excited to meet him today. And we have two new honorary colonels.
You do. Mr. Doolan, who's the co-owner of Hillside Tire, and I know you know Steve Brad, and they are great business leaders in our community, and Tim Blair and his wife, who live in District 4, who own 2 insurance agencies located both within the city as well, provide specialized large group health insurance
Yeah.
policies.
And maybe share to the council what their role is with respect to the police, honorary colonels. The support.
They're a fraternal organization. They support police and law enforcement issues. They support police officers in time of need. They support causes that are important to the police. They're completely independent from the police department, so they're a 509c3 organization. They raise money and they donate that money. They lobby for events, and they
How many colonels do we have now related to Cottonwood Heights? 6, 7?
8.
Okay. Great. And we'll welcome them. We'll have citizen comments, and for everyone's information right now, that I know we'll have several there talking about the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan and also the conversion therapy, and have people responding and making comment regarding those two things. Now, with the interest in the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan, Mike's presentation, Mike Johnson's presentation, as far as updating the council and the audience, for that's kind of an awkward time. We'll do it just as per the agenda, unless somebody feels strongly differently.
I'm sorry, I made a face. I wonder though, it sounds like Mike has done a great job meeting with constituents for hours and educating them about it. It seems like once they understand where we've come from, where we've gone, there's maybe an epiphany and they feel better about it. Am I being presumptuous?
I don't know that the epiphany always happens.
Oh.
But I do feel like a lot of the concerns we've heard are almost directly addressed in the plan.
Well,
The
that's why I
connections-
bring it up, because I'm hesitating a little bit. We've talked about, because we know a lot of the comments, will be regarding that. If we have him do his presentation before public comment, but yet was kind of out of order a little bit.
But couldn't we do it just like we normally do it, where we have comments, I don't know.
We have citizen comments, then we have him.
I personally feel like it's, any Wasatch Boulevard comment should be reserved until after his presentation, because I think otherwise
No,
we'll all.
That makes sense to me too.
I'm gonna
Yeah, that's why I bring it up.
I think it would probably be, I think it would probably inform a lot of the comments
Yeah.
quite a bit.
There's no question that.
Regardless of what he says, if they still the same way, they can say it, but if they were like, oh, well, I didn't know that, and that mitigates my comments, then that's.
So you could just do citizen comments, then presentation, and then citizen
No.
comments on the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan.
Okay, so
That way it stays in order, but we take comments again.
we'd ask people to identify what their comments are regarding, and those on Wasatch Boulevard, we'd ask them to make them after his presentation. Yeah, I'm fine with that. You okay with that?
Okay with that.
This
Mike,
is
are
that
you
Tim,
okay with
Yeah.
Tim actually kind of threw that out to me, I think it was yesterday, and we kind of went back and forth, and I kind of pushed back that way, but then as I was thinking about it, well, I brought it up to this group and see how y'all feel. Yeah, okay? Well, that's answer many questions that way. And Shelton, you're sitting to my left, so you kick me if I screw it up. We have then 3 action items, which is the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan that we've been working on for the last 2.5 years. Adopting a policy on use of public property. Shane, this is according to HB 163. I know most every entity has to do that. You want to give us a brief insight on that?
Yeah, historically, the Utah Code has had strong penalties for misuse of public funds, but the concept of misusing public property didn't receive the same attention. So all of that was changed in this last session of the legislature when they enacted HB 163, which includes public property and its misuse in that same basket. The bill basically invites governmental entities to enact policies that describe or define what sorts of private use of public property is permissible. And this becomes kind of an important issue for city employees. What if they take home a pen, a pad of paper? What if they take a personal call on their city-issued cell phone? What if their family comes in and meets them for a few minutes in the office to say hello? All of those things are arguably misuse of public property, and so they are things that are covered by this proposed policy that defines what sorts of incidental de minimis use of public property is permissible and doesn't constitute actionable private misuse of the public property.
Can you help me understand what that means in terms of city-owned vehicles in this policy?
Well, I don't know that the policy expressly covers city-owned vehicles, but I think that an example would be if Tim is issued a city-owned vehicle. If he uses it for incidental use, stops, runs errands on the way home, something like that. So I think the thrust of the policy is that no matter what type of public property it is, if the use is truly incidental, de minimis, not material, why then it's okay.
Okay, questions? Look,
If there was a planning vehicle that got driven home regularly every night, or taken on a trip, that would obviously.
Well, what brings that idea to my mind is the police vehicles.
Yeah, and I think that on police, the policy is that they can use the vehicles because it has a deterrent effect. But the chief can correct me if I'm wrong.
It has a deterrent effect, and they're on call 24 hours, and they're expected to respond when they observe crimes in progress, and they have to have those resources and equipment available to them.
It just seems like we ought to be sure that the policy covers the way we manage that. And so we don't put them in a bind with what we've expected them to do.
Yeah, and I think that there's a catch-all here.
isn't there additional policies that deal with that in our city?
Internal policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, authorized personal use includes the public servant is authorized to use or possess the city property to fulfill the public servant's duties owed to the city, which in the case of the police would be being on call 24/7. So, yeah,
You think we're,
I think we're okay.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back one on the action items, regarding the Wasatch Boulevard Master Plan, and I want to give Mike a chance. Is there anything that you want to share with us now prior to going inside, and do you have any questions from the council?
No, I've prepared just a list of notes to share that I think clarify a lot of the concerns we've heard that can be clarified. One is the role of a master plan, what it is not.
So the master plan is the same as a bid document, right?
Well, the master plan is this document, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
It's not the time.
Just the opposite.
No, yeah, so clarifying that, clarifying some examples of the goals and the recommendations in this plan that I feel directly address some of the concerns we've been hearing.
So are you going to talk about UDOT's change in attitude, this new attitude of their willingness to understand that we look at Wasatch Boulevard different than a typical standard UDOT highway?
Yes.
I want the council to know that I confirmed that position, as I heard from John Thomas and his supervisor, with the director of UDOT yesterday, and he was right on board 100%, that they will look at this almost as a pilot, as an example, to look at gateways, not just Cottonwood Heights, but they have a few others they may look at, to consider enhancements, you know, if it's pedestrian, if it's landscaping aesthetics, if it's active transportation, all these things are on the table, and,
Yeah, UDOT's been directed to look at Wasatch Boulevard, particularly south of Big Cottonwood Canyon, and its design and its future function in a more unique, contextual way.
yeah.
Whereas normally a highway project will pull a design, apply it wherever it is without context. They've been directed to analyze this and create a design standard specific to the recommendations in this plan, public feedback from members of the public, and then input from various stakeholders.
Oh, but I think too, what I heard is specifically working in partnership with the city.
Yes, the city, and, where applicable, the county, UTA, will be a big partner in this. Bringing these parties together, that will hopefully help us further some of the recommendations we're making in here.
Yeah.
John Thomas has indicated that he will be in attendance tonight and can provide additional detail if you'd like.
Let him say comments, we hear it from his own mouth, yeah.
Yep.
But and I heard it from his mouth before, but again, I presented that concept to Central Wasatch Commission yesterday, and Commissioner comments, I articulated that, and Carlos was saying right there,
Yeah, and the last thing I'm gonna touch on is the public input process that we've, just a summary of, the background of this plan.
Mike, do you feel like we as a city, because, right now, they're talking about maybe adding sort of a lane from 94 that heads up to my office to just help that merge there. They're really not talking about adding 2 lanes after the high T. And then we only have 2 lanes towards G Vernay. So I don't know that I saw it in this master plan, but I know we've talked about it. And I know you've included this here, that emphasis on roadway widening being done in transit prioritized ways and those things, but we almost have a bit of leverage because we do have a 2-lane road after the high T. And so you're essentially widening a road that then chokes up again on either side. So I just wonder,
Yeah.
do you feel like that's a way that we can work with UDOT to maybe get more of what we want our constituents?
You know, I think it is, and I think they've shown progress, in their thinking, and this, you know, this new design approach is part of that. But one of our goals is to move people through the corridor reliably and safely, not to, you know, relocate issues further down the corridor. So with the goals and the recommendations, one of the recommendations I'm sharing tonight is, I kind of combined 2 for this point, but is to, you know, in partnership with UDOT, obviously, consider any capacity increases sensitively, and minimize the pavement width of the roadway as much as possible. And I think those recommendations and the goals and what else is in the plan allow us the clear stance that we need to look at this very carefully. We need to analyze specific areas just like that, so we're not just, you know, looking at this out of context and just moving a problem further down, if that doesn't make the problem go away.
Another hot potato, which you brought up before, and I remember on UDOT's EIS meeting, it was surprising to me how many people mentioned the concern on speed. Okay, and I think it was in our meeting with John and Brian, that they said that's on the table. Yeah, it's not, you know, it's something we definitely can talk about. And almost, I got a sense that it would be considered.
It is, I know it's picking up traction, within UDOT and within our plan. You know, we reference multiple times to take a close look at speeds through design of the roadway, through posted limits, to do what we can to, obviously understanding the need to maintain, you know, a proper level of service to get cars through there, but to balance that against the, you know, the local access and the residents of the city that use this, you know, as their everyday road.
One of the first things you emphasize is what is a master plan for this type of project. It's a living document.
Yep.
It can still be modified going forward with new information, found new facts, and all that stuff. It's not a,
Right.
so it gives us some leverage to proceed right now, and I think it's because of our approach that UDOT is accepting us as a valuable partner right off, rather than just saying,
It is, and I believe John will share that with you, in his comments.
So Mike, while you're thinking there was one comment that I talked to Tim about today, and that is on page 51, bullet number 3. It states, eliminated reference to sound walls, replaced with statement that road improvement should not drastically increase current peak noise levels. I think that I feel very strongly about either taking out drastically, but what I really was hoping that we would add to this document was more of a technical use of decibel levels, that decibel levels should not increase from existing conditions or something like that, so.
We did make a small modification just today that took out, I believe, the word, it was substantially or drastically. It doesn't provide specific decibel levels. I don't know what that is right now, but.
But if you don't even need to say what those levels are, other than the fact that the decibel level should not be more than
Yes.
current existing.
And that's what it says.
conditions.
That is the
Okay.
modification that's been made.
Okay,
It shouldn't increase more than the daily peak
current.
sound, yeah, the current, yeah.
That's,
We've taken out the
Yeah, the
adjective,
drastic. Yes.
the adverb.
Thank you. But speaking to what the mayor just said, if there are things that come up that we do wanna change, Can you explain what the process would be to the public, because I'm not even sure I
Yeah.
know what that is.
And the analogy I use that I'll share in there is this is similar to a general plan where it's a living document, it's an ongoing guide for future decision-making, future policy setting, creation of ordinances. There may be things that come up in this area that we haven't thought about, that no one knows about yet. And these are flexible documents to be able to react to those.
So what does that mean, like, actually? Like,
That
that means
means
that if we
if-
make a
if-
change, we have to go get public comment to
Mhm.
make the change,
We get public input on modifications.
So I think that sort of explanation that defines that would be helpful.
And in general, it would be similar to a general plan. It would be
Have a
going
plan
back with,
amendment.
with planning commission input and back to the council for consideration.
Well, and to me, the other,
With public input
yeah,
through
the
that.
other big thing that's still not clear is, okay, here we have a concept that it's us and UDOT and some other players. Part of it, what does that mean, and what will that process now be, which we don't know. That's the big question that I have. You know, I know that they've got consultants they're gonna hire, there's a whole myriad of steps that I know that UDOT has to go through, and we're part of that. And maybe that's for a discussion another day, but that's maybe one of the first things I want to understand, so that it's not just,
I think having some sort of a framework there is, at least,
Yeah.
you say, here you can start here, certainly goes a long way of expressing our views, rather
Yeah.
than just kind of having them, again, stick it into their design guidelines and see what comes
and
out.
I'm gonna say this frankly, I think what's happened here, and one thing that's pushed it back to the city, is they took this concept to the stakeholder group of 35 plus individuals. It was a disaster. They just kind of threw their hands up, walked away and said, you know what, we'll do it with those right here in Cottonwood Heights City to do it, and then not have to try and jump through the hoops that they looked as an impossibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that I want to emphasize is that I've seen a lot of, I believe, just confusion about is this is not just a road plan. It's not a transportation plan. An area master plan looks at transportation, and here it's a big part of it, but it also looks at land use, recreation, transit, other things. So clarifying that the transportation recommendations require this working partnership with UDOT, but that there are other aspects of this plan, you know, the encouragement of the creation of a transit center, active shared use pathway throughout the area, connected trail network, focusing commercial redevelopment outside of the corridor, maybe on, you know, commercial areas in the gravel pit site, as opposed to along the corridor, limiting additional park and rides. That kind of thing is within the you know, the purview of the city to create policy and ordinance to begin implementing. So this plan goes far beyond just a plan about the road, and I've seen some comments say, you know, deny this road widening plan, and in a lot of ways this is almost the opposite of a road widening plan. We're saying, before we think about capacity at all, let's look at the context here, let's think about this sensitively.
All right, Mike,
I'm just so you know, I mentioned these to Mike, there was just a couple of technical changes I'd asked for. There was a list on page 158 that was supposed to match the one on page 6. I said, at least fix those, on a couple of other small things, but.
I think everyone's made a lot of comments and met with Mike, and I applaud you for trying to get most of those into the plan and massage the language brought, and both from the council as well as outside. We had one group that had 800 signatures and had a petition, and there's many of those items in that petition that had some value. We looked at that and included that, so everybody's had some input. Yeah. Any questions of Mike before we move on?
And I think, Mike, it'd be useful for folks to know that you did take the comments that were given to UDOT in the meeting that we had and incorporated those, because a lot of emails, I don't know if you've seen them all, that I've seen, and I think what the mayor has seen, have said, we had this meeting and we were not sure whether those messages were heard, but we
Right,
did take those into
I'll touch on that. That's one of the reasons that the decision has been continued from originally October until now, is to incorporate some of those comments.
You said this decision.
This was initially scheduled for action back in October, and it was continued and then just postponed for a while to take into account.
I asked for postponement, like that was just a couple of months ago.
It was
Or
October.
Was that October?
Mhm.
I think I asked for that one.
Well, we've had different ones.
It was continued 2 weeks, scheduled again, and then just removed to give time for additional input through the EIS
Okay.
process.
So Christine's comment about having dates is important because sometimes people probably start getting a lot of.
All right, the next item real quickly, on tonight's action is, approving a consulting agreement with Landmark Design. As one of our action items in our retreat, this last fall for this year was, looking at the PDD zone and cleaning it up and rewriting aspects of it, and so we have money in our, what's it called, what account? Professional services that we want to use for this.
Mhm. Yeah, this was one of the council priorities in the administrative direction plan, was to assess and revise the PDD ordinance. We reached out to about 10 consultant firms and had in-person interviews with 5 or 6 of them, and felt Landmark, for the price, had good qualifications, very similar experience with these projects, and can provide a professional level project in a timely manner. And the reason we chose a consultant group is to eliminate any internal bias that might be perceived.
In your council packet, they went through and outlined, the deliverables and stuff like that,
Mhm.
the costs.
There was a little language in the contract that was kind of soft on consulting with the council. It's like, if they felt applicable, they would update us. I thought it should be a little more
I thought it required.
strong.
There's 6 hours in their scope for 3 planning commission meetings and 3 council meetings.
Yeah.
I've read it as well. I thought it was a little squishy. I'm just trying to pull it up again. I'm sorry. I guess I had 2 comments. That was one of them. The second was, in the scope, it talked about, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding. Okay, here it is. It says, we will meet with members of the planning commission and city council if deemed appropriate. This was just in their scope, so perhaps it
Mhm.
didn't translate into the contract, but I think that I think that's what Tally's mentioning. And then the other said we will meet with developers and property owners, we will meet with you and other members of staff. I feel like this is one area where many of our constituents have had lots of interest, and I almost think there should be a point number 5, and I don't know how you integrate comments from our public, but it seems like over the 2 years, 1.5 that I've been here, it might be interesting to include some of their perspectives.
So, one of the issues, the scope of this is not a massive process as far as their services, because we have limited funds related to that. But we are going to engage the council, the planning commission, and the public in the adoption process. It's just, we have to be fairly limited unless we wanna expand the scope where we're looking at.
And the cost.
And the cost. And so typically with consulting groups like this, with this size of plan, not a general plan, with this size of plan, we will focus them on getting a product put together with the input, and then we bring it forward with multiple input processes with the council. If we feel they need to come answer questions that we as staff can't answer, we'll bring them to integrate with the or to discuss things with the council. But we don't wanna expand the scope to the point where we're.
I read this and I see, we will meet with developers and property owners who have either applied the code or are considering application of the code to understand the perceptions on why they use the code, how they thought it would work, how it actually worked. So to me, when I read this, I read it as, how can we make sure that this works for them versus how do we make sure that this works for our community? And when it says, and city council if deemed appropriate, I feel sort of left out of the process. And as a legislative body, that sort of was offensive to me. I'm just sharing, sorry to be so blunt and honest, but when I read it, I thought if any of our constituents had read that, they might have the same concerns. And so I tried to put myself in other people's shoes, and I felt very uncomfortable. So.
That language does make it sound like they're vested in finding out how this can better serve the developers.
That's not the intent at all of this. The intent, we're driving this process as a city. This is our consultant that's going to provide us the work product to get us to the point where we can have that input process. That's not the intent at all. We're driving this, not the development community. And that's how I feel related to that.
changed, or at least with that as far as comments. But I think, yeah, with a lot of this going through staff, I think we would certainly have our shot at input.
Well,
And
it still
this
has to
would
be
need to go
approved by
through
the council.
this goes to the planning commission ultimately as well, right?
Mhm.
So they would have their process, their public hearing.
Yes, it's a legislative item, so planning commission and city council.
Would you make a request that the language just be changed to reflect that they shall meet with the
So if we
legislative
remove
body?
if deemed appropriate,
Absolutely.
If the
I
city
mean-
deems appropriate.
we're just gonna
I
require
don't
the
know how
meeting
you
with
feel
No, no,
about
I
council.
mean,
just,
that's fine, yeah.
there's no
Remove the
problem with
word
that
if,
in my book. I
if
think we ought
deemed
to.
appropriate. We'll do that.
That's fine.
Somebody
To
just-
me, to me, that's kinda understood, but you're right, it doesn't say that. You know, we go that way, and to have that clear is, yeah.
We can do that.
because if you don't say that, they start meeting with us, then guess what's gonna happen? They're gonna start charging, they're gonna ask for a change order, and suddenly it'll be 1,000 extra for 2,000, 3,000.
Well, see, I just-
That's been my experience
So,
Yes.
that's
with these
clear.
type of things.
I went on after that statement, it gives that matrix and it talks about a meeting with the city council, so I kinda, you know, assumed that we definitely clearly would have that at our request.
We'll just remove if deemed appropriate from that sentence and make sure that
It's
a work
mandatory.
session discussion and whatever is required is done.
They haven't signed this yet, right? Or they did, they'll just need to resign.
They have, I don't think they'll have an issue with this change though.
So whoever makes a motion on this, just note that change.
With that change, yeah, yeah, subject to that change. Okay, subject to that change. Okay, thank you. The time's running short, let's move quickly to staff reports. Let's talk about facility use policy discussion, and we've been doing this for a while, and let's turn it over to Kim.
Yeah, so since our last meeting, when we discussed this and decided to move it forward to consideration in a business meeting, Chief Russo and the police department had submitted a letter to me, which I included in the packet for you, with concerns that they have on the alcohol portion of the policy. It relates, they express their concerns in there and also recommend against that provision in the policy to the council. I thought it would be important for us to bring this back to the work session with that information as part of this, and if you had questions and wanted to have Chief Russo convey his concerns with this, that's why it's back here before you. I understand the issues that he's brought forward. I still feel like we can support moving this forward to a business meeting for consideration of the council, but wanted you to have that input prior to a decision to be made. So that's my intro.
when it comes to your department heads, how does their job description read? Are they here to advise, provide facts and data? How does that read exactly?
Well, the role of the executive staff and department heads is to provide their professional opinion on issues and recommendations. And so that occurs with all of our staff related to their executive duties on the issues.
What about lobbying?
That's not what we're talking about here related to this.
Like it in the letter, if you read it.
It's a professional opinion related to this issue and topic. Like I say, department, city staff provide recommendations and input to the council. It's your decision. You'll make a decision on this, and input is provided by staff, and that's what's happening.
Well, a couple of questions on the letter. Robbie, and Shane, maybe this, I think somewhere in the letter on the second page.
Can we just, start from a high level? I thought I'd pull this out of our Utah League of Cities and Towns. It provides our powers and duties. I think it's helpful to just remind ourselves what our job here is. Cause I think about this often when I wanna get in the weeds and make comments to Mike Johnson or whomever, and I know that's not my requirement. Legislative power is distinguished from executive powers, the authority to make laws but not to enforce them or appoint the people charged with the duty to enforce. Individual members of the council have at least one thing as a matter of right. That is their right to vote as a member of the council. A council, acting as a group, has the right to set policy for the city or town and control the finances of the city or town. We have two things that we're in charge of: legislative issues and budget. Those are our two issues. This, what we're talking about tonight, is a legislative issue. Like Kelly said, we look to you and your staff members to provide us facts. Where, with this policy, where are we missing the mark? Do we not have enough adequate insurance? What happens if somebody who's the monitor is not being acknowledged or respected? Like what with this policy, where did we fall short? That's what I see our staff to provide us with, guidance, right? I'm not interested in, because legislatively, we determine what the policy is and whether we want to vote for that policy. We're not looking for somebody's advice. The very first line of this, the first paragraph, last line, underline, says, the police department strongly opposes a policy change. That's not the police department's job. We determine if we want to apply the policy and support the policy. We want to know what is wrong with our policy and what those facts are. So as I read this, as a council member, somebody who takes seriously what our role is, I was very concerned with that. And I want to make it clear that what our job is and what we're looking to from our staff members. So it sounds like we have this discussion. It sounds like that's clear.
Yeah, but on this issue, on land use issues, on every issue in the city that is brought forward, we provide recommendations to you. Recommendations and input, data input, we provide that. That is part of our role. That's not a decision. We're not making a decision. We provide recommendations. And we've been doing
Facts.
We've been doing that, yeah,
Correct.
forever. I've been doing that in my career when I bring things to the council for legislative decision, provide professional input on the matter.
Okay, fair enough. And when you provide those facts to us, you tend to think about what your lane is, right? So Mike's not gonna talk about police issues in his letter to us or his opinion. Robbie's not gonna talk about, whether, where is it? I fear the city will be expanding the reception business in direct competition to licensed private providers, taking their revenues because of an exceptionally affordable rental rate. There are certain lanes, I think, that we look to staff members. That, to me, doesn't seem like a police department's lane. I look at, is this policy safe? Where might we incur liability from a police perspective? It's all about your lane. And so when I just want to be sure that we're talking about the lanes of expertise when we're getting recommendations. Does that make sense? That particular one, I mean, we could go paragraph by paragraph here, and I could provide comments, but I don't think we need to do that. But I would just ask that perhaps, at some point, or however you want to do it, go paragraph by paragraph and determine, is this in our lane? And then perhaps, like, I could offer some suggestions on how we can improve this, because this is fine. It would have been helpful to get feedback as we were going along, right, as we were working on the policy for the last year. But we didn't get that at our business meetings. We just got this at the end. So that's a process issue, I think. The mayor always talks about process. So what failed in the process where we ended up with this? And then if we're gonna end up with this, if this is what we're gonna be expected to see, actually we're gonna vote, so we put off the vote, so we could talk about this. I'd like to go through these paragraphs and understand, like, how does it fit in those lanes? Because I'm not sure some of these things fit in this lane, and to be honest, I read this with some concern, because we have a .05 law right now. If we've looked at the data, we've seen that there's been a decrease in arrests with DUI, and I think we'll see that more into the future. And so I want to just be able to, again, weigh those facts of what the current reality is versus what was in this letter, and I'm not sure I saw that.
In the second policy there, Tim, our police chief states that a safe space of City Hall can't be properly regulated. I think our police officers can deliver a lot better than that. I think that's a very low expectation of them. We just gave a huge department increase to ensure that we have the best of the best in the valley. To say that they can't properly regulate a handful of citizens having wine at a wedding, I find it offensive and absurd. In
I
paragraph
guess I,
4,
to be fair, I didn't read that as a dig at our officers.
that they can't properly regulate,
I didn't take it as a,
it seems.
Well-
Down in paragraph 4, that this would attract regional gatherings. Our chief has been present at every meeting, and we clearly established that it would not be available to people outside of our citizenry, that only Cottonwood Heights residents would be able to rent this facility with alcohol use. So that's alarming that that error was even made.
I would say this is input, like I said, it's input for you to consider as you deliberate on approving the policy.
I think another question is on certain processes is that I'm wondering if the recommendations or the communication from subordinates to the city manager go through you directly, through your engineers, and then kind of brought to us. I think this was.
Isn't that what happened here?
No.
Well,
How did you get this,
yeah, this was a letter provided to me.
that he provided to us?
Well, the original draft came to me as well. And I made that direction to be transparent, and I think it's important that, you know, the department heads are Tim's subordinates. And that communication that way, rather than historically, sometimes things that come in directly to the council from department heads. And I think I'm just being frank and clear,
I think there's
and Tim agrees that, yeah.
And we can do better at that.
Yeah, and we're just talking about here. And then two, there's some things that Christine brings up that are alarming at this point. When it says, I think it may even be illegal, I think it's on the second page, in the same paragraph. And that's where we have Shane to tell us if it's illegal to compete with private industry or not in this realm, in that letter. I mean, there's some things in there that need to be filtered and reviewed and not in the circumstance here. Is it illegal, is that the word?
I'm not seeing illegal, but.
yeah,
Unlawful.
Unlawful, yeah. Unlawful, because I've testified at the legislature on that competition in another venue, so that's something that I think is shame, not, I'm not sure it's a law enforcement issue. I mean, so again, we're talking about processes here and how to do that, and, you know, but at the same time, Robbie, today, giving you a couple minutes to, state your logic behind what you've submitted in your letter, so.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, since I had a lot of barbs thrown at me. But let me first tell you that no one in this room holds certainly the gatekeeper on passion or love of the city, or feels strongly about an item. I will tell you that I feel badly that this has come to you late. I'm sorry that the police department wasn't involved early on. I can speculate as to why that occurred, but it did occur. We had this discussion when we opened this building, and we made the decision, the police department was included at that time, not to have alcohol in that room. And now it has surfaced again, and I've given you some opinions as to why. It is my role to tell you why I think that it's a problem. It is my role to tell you if I think something is illegal. You do make the policy, that is right. But I'm not going to go into the other room and have citizens come up and say, again, I was listening to a meeting and I heard everyone talking except the police and fire department. So yes, I did generate a letter because I don't want any of them thinking that I did not properly represent the concerns of the police department. You have weddings that are being held in there, and you have person, a young person who is monitoring that, and they've had difficulties and challenges handling issues without alcohol. So now we want to introduce the mix, and you're right, we do have a .05 law, which means that if you have 2 drinks, and that is the fact, then you would be in violation of the law, and I don't think it's good policy, and I think it's a problem, a safety problem, to have that occur and to expose people underage drinking in a facility managed by the city. And the safe haven issue is, yes, the police department can provide a safe haven, but the police department are not in charge of monitoring the room. You have civilians monitoring the room. As far as the unlawfulness of it, you are competing, or would be competing, with private industry. If I have a private reception hall, I don't receive a subsidy from the city. You pay $20, what is it, $20 an hour, whatever is suggested here to hold that and to hold your event, and for that you pay $18 to someone for them to monitor the event. Yet the city subsidizes the cleaning, the over the bond, all of that. And the reason I bring that up is it's because we've had what was called the Doug Short rule, where this has been addressed before, and we don't do a full costing. And if I were a private restaurant or a reception center, I would find issue with using taxpayer dollar to subsidize and directly compete with me. I can go line by line if you would like and do that, but let me remind you that we have a church across the street, a high school across the street. We are in the middle of a residential area. We are not in Salt Lake City. And when we built this facility, we made certain promises to the surrounding neighborhood as to what would and would not be occurring here. And I just want to make sure that we remember that. If you'd like to talk about the specific issues, I will be happy to entertain any other questions
Well, I have a couple
that you have.
questions, and I'm not sure how much time we have after you bring back, but I guess my question to Shane, is anything that's in this proposed policy illegal?
I think that the decision to arguably go into competition with reception centers was made when the policy was first enacted, and we decided to allow events here. And I don't know how the adding of alcohol is going to exacerbate that, really. I think the fundamental decision has been made. Government competes with private industry all the time. Rec centers,
25, 30 years.
Utopia, there's a lot of different times that government takes on, an activity that private industry already is providing, golf courses, what have you. So
The second point, Robbie, to be frank, is that I guess this has been an agenda item 3, 4, 5 times over the last 6 months, but you never spoke up in those initial times. Is that because you didn't feel it at that time? I mean, it was after the fact. Did we cut you off? Did I not recognize
That's
you?
the point that makes me question, is this lobbying for some outside interest?
No, I think it's just.
Ample time, if it was directly coming from our chief, there's ample opportunity for opinion.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's a reason you didn't verbalize early on in the discussion, is after, or that in your weekly meetings with the management team on Mondays, it was after it was almost all decided. Shane had done a couple iterations of the liability insurance before it was brought from our police race. So is that because our process didn't encourage it, didn't allow it? You didn't feel you were supposed to? Sincerely, I'm perplexed as to why it wasn't put forth earlier in the discussion rather than after, almost the end of it.
Well, to suggest that I've never brought that issue up is just not true. I haven't brought it up in this forum, but you've had presenters here, and it seemed clear to me that that an agenda was being made, and you didn't wish the input. It wasn't until I actually, to be honest, had a case of the conscience when I walked in the other room and had citizens question why the police department didn't have an opinion or opine on this issue, and so I chose to do that. And let's be honest, it has not been the most friendly environment. Just at the beginning of this meeting, you talked as if I were not in the room amongst yourselves and attacked the memo. You could have simply just asked me line by line, Anne, why did you wait to this forum to have this discussion with me? You knew this letter occurred. Any one of you could have called me offline and said, what are the concerns on this? But you waited until we were in a public forum to have this. It feels very much like an attack, so.
Robbie, did you call me? I'm the one that brought this up. This was my piece of legislation on behalf of a constituent that was in this room earlier today. Did you call me and let me know of your concerns? I mean, I don't remember getting a call from you
Yeah,
about
well-
the concerns before I got this letter. So as the person that pushed this forward, I know you're feeling upset, but perhaps I am too.
I get that, but again, we keep saying I respond directly to a city manager. If you'd like to change that, have me call you and interact with all of you personally. I'm happy to do that as well, but
So you said that
That's-
you generated a letter after talking with some citizens, so is it fair to say you're lobbying in the interest of the citizens that you spoke directly with?
No,
I'd like to drop the lobbying comment. I'd also, at least before we run out of time, make a point that you probably should immediately dismiss something because it came in at the last minute. Because if you're going to say that that's gonna be our policy because suddenly it just showed up at the end, then you're getting to go out and ignore the dozens or hundreds of emails that have showed up in last week about the Wasatch Plan. People, I just found out about, I'd like my input heard too. I mean,
That's not even a fair comparison.
it's
though.
absolutely the same comparison.
Citizens are hearing
It's
just now
absolutely the same.
about Wasatch Boulevard,
You
whereas it
either
should
take
be
things
every
at the
3
end or
months.
you don't.
Well, my concern is that this doesn't get a personal thing. I think we need to talk further. I think we've only got 5 minutes, we gotta go inside. We can come back and go through this point by point. I think this is unique because I personally believe there was many opportunities before to express concerns. Okay, I mean, because I think you've been in every meeting, and I don't mean to pick on you, I just try to be honest. But if you have felt that it's not a friendly environment, or we've not been encouraged from your supervisor to do that, then we need to look at that whole thing. Yeah, but it's unfortunate it gets to this point, but we need to look at what we can do to improve whatever communication mechanisms we have, so it's not after the fact. That, we hire professionals, if it's financial, if it's fire, if it's police, or legal, to give us input. I'm not an attorney, I'm not a police officer. My first thing that I'll go to say is illegal, Is there concerns? I'm assuming that, well, you've sat here for 15 years, that's why you're at this table, okay? But I can't tell you how you feel either. If you feel you couldn't respond, then we need to find the mechanism and work with him and how that becomes more appropriate.
Well, thank you, and my position hasn't changed from several years ago when we had this discussion initially. You are the policymakers, I brought this forward, those are my opinions. If you want to vote it through and make the policy, that is your right, that is what you do. And I've done my duty.
Yeah, I mean, personally, my suggestion on this particular issue has not changed. For efficacy's sake, I'd say that we pass the changes we talked about, a lot of these changes as is, and take the alcohol component out and do a little bit deeper dive, possibly do a public survey and find out what the community wants to do, and then revisit it in 3 or 4 months.
Are you willing to share with people that 7% of our tax dollars are used to pay for this building?
Yeah.
You were here from the get-go, so if I recall, part of the justification for the millions and millions that were bonded for this building was that it would be available to the citizens.
And is
for a
available
very
to the citizens
reasonable
for
price.
use.
And yet, those that feel that it's socially appropriate to be able to offer wine at a wedding or at an art gallery display, they feel excluded, yet their tax dollars still fund that enormous bond.
Same,
Well, you
same
want-
thing's true of a park.
I say you want a dog park, not everyone's gonna use it, so we shouldn't do that.
Well,
I'm sorry,
well, okay,
that sees.
We've kind of been through this. I look at a couple of things.
Anyway, I'd like to get the parts of the policy that are not up for debate or issue done quickly. I'm not opposed to discussing it in more detail, but I think it probably needs to be discussed in more detail.
Well, for me, I think Shane's built in the protections that are are pretty tough to meet in all honesty. Okay, the protections are there, the competition with enterprise, government's been dealing with that for 20, 30 years. The legislature looked at it 15 years ago with fitness centers and things like that, and finally, it's too tough. It's everywhere. So I appreciate the concern. It's a valid concern we should be sensitive to. So I turn to Shane from a liability point of view, a legal point of view. We have Robbie's input. When I turn to our city manager who has to administer it, and you're telling me that you're okay with it. Is that correct? Or
With
I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
what's been put in from the liability standpoint.
And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying that I am absolutely opposed to it in any way, shape, or form, but on that issue, I think it deserves a little bit more consideration and discussion.
What do you feel like you haven't gotten to talk about? Or what don't you, what education would be helpful to you?
I would like, this one I feel is very easily handled with some public outreach and a survey. I'd be really interested to find out what, I suspect that the survey would show that most people are positively inclined. That would certainly help inform my decision to make it say, well, this is absolutely what the public wants, I've got no problem with it. I think the issues we put in there, the constraints are worthwhile, but, it's, again, on this one, that part of it, I wouldn't mind spending another couple months and just going through it a little bit more, or a little more in detail. This is probably the longest discussion we've had on it.
Okay, we're out of time. I'm ready to move ahead on it personally. I think I've had plenty of time to look at it. We can always go back and modify and change the problem. I do that based upon Shane's work, hearing Robbie's concerns, our city manager, and you're here, you have to manage it. Any concerns you have that, Sarah?
I mean, I've got things here that I can deal with, so.
Okay,
You have things
I mean,
here?
well,
Tell me what.
you don't have time, but I mean, there's.
Maybe you could
She has some
summarize them
ideas
in a
she'd
letter
like to
as well.
discuss.
No,
That's what that means.
I mean, I can see Robbie's points. I can see them, but maybe it just has to, I just gotta do more on my side to make it work.
Yeah, well,
I mean, and that's under his direction. And that's my honest, I mean, I can see both sides. I honestly can see both sides.
well, with the Dram Shop Act and those things, we want to be sensitive. We don't want to.
I wanna be careful.
Oh, yeah. We all do.
I wanna be careful.
That's why Shane's liability emphasis is so strong. And then, again, you have to have the right people who can ensure with yourself that those things are met.
Yes, I wanna be really careful. And like I said before, I think a big concern is I've only found one insurance company that I can get for the $2 million.
I might recommend you reaching out to Holiday City and their police department. They have special events there. They have a Blue Moon event on August 24th. They've been doing it since 2014. It's their most popular event. They serve alcohol.
Well, in the county, we did it at our parks periodically with special events, decades. Yeah. And again, it
Maybe
was-
the other way to handle it, maybe handle it on the, I don't know.
Well, but I think,
That's again, we haven't discussed.
in a way, in essence, that's what we've done. If you have that event, it becomes special, and you have to meet the liability, so. All right, we gotta go inside.